All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on walking for neuroplasticity. We're scheduled to be going on for an hour or so, but we got kind of low numbers. So unless there's loads of questions to be answered, we might get through it a lot quicker. Do feel free to leave any questions in the chat. We'll also have time at the end if anything comes up. But otherwise, let's just get into it. A little bit about me. My name is James. I'm a movement coach specializing in the brain and nervous system. If you want the closest comparison, basically like a physiotherapist, I'm not a medical doctor. I don't diagnose, I don't prescribe any medications, anything like that. However, the big difference, I guess, is that a physiotherapist's goal is usually to get rid of negative symptoms. My goal is always just to improve everything as much as I can. So you go to your physio with pain, their job is complete when the pain goes away. If you come to see me about pain, my job is to help you reshape your understanding of pain, help you train your body so that next time you deal with painful stimulus, you actually have better tools to overcome it and to manage it. So, kind of splitting hairs with the definitions, but that's what it is. My kind of goal with my business is to use movement to improve mental and physical health. So, a lot of the time, I'm working with usually the vast majority of my work is going to be in pain management and injuries and things like that, just because most of the time people don't reach out for help until they're already in the thick of the bad situation. However, I also do a lot of work with athletes and circus performers and people like that in order to improve skills, improve how they learn, improve just general habits that lead to greater success. And that's kind of the realm that we're going to be looking at today. So, we're going to be talking about something called neuroplasticity. You may have heard of this already. It kind of gets thrown around quite a lot these days. Um, Really, it's just a fancy word to talk about the brain's ability to rewire and change itself. And if you're here in 2025, it might seem silly to even think like, how would the brain not be able to rewire and change itself? You see kids, they don't know very much. You see adults, they know a lot. Something's got to be going on there. You see people at all stages and times in their life where their brain goes through changes for better or for worse. Their mental health can improve, get worse. Their learning, their ability to learn new things can improve and get worse. Uh, the brain definitely changes at all times, but it's not actually a super commonly held belief in a lot of people, mostly because it's only in the last 30 years or so, maybe a little bit more now, that we've kind of had this idea that the brain is plastic and that the brain can actually change throughout life. Plastic meaning the ability to change. So, like, that's why they call plastic plastic, was that you can mold it and shape it, not that the brain is actually made out of plastic. But yeah, when I do a lot of work with physios, especially student physios, sometimes where we're talking about neuroplasticity and how to influence people's learning better, and then they go back into their medical school and speak to their doctors and professors and say like, oh yeah, we've been learning about like neuroplasticity and the brain's ability to change, and a lot of the time they come back saying, yeah, the professor said no, that's not true. The brain doesn't change after 25 years old. Once you've hit 25, your brain is completely fixed and no new learning or no new change is possible. Those professors are 100% wrong. That's absolutely not true. But it's one of the problems when, if you don't have to keep up to date with neuroscience specifically in your field, then you kind of learn. what you learned way back 40 years ago is what sticks with you, and because of that, we end up with a lot of conflict when it comes to the brain. We all kind of get the idea that we're able to learn new stuff, but most people still hold on to some element of the fact that, as we get older, our brain just becomes fixed and we're going to have this fixed mindset, fixed ability of what we can learn and stuff like that. But it's just not true. So that might be good news or bad news. Sorry to shatter anybody's beliefs. And then the other thing to note about this is that the brain's ability to change doesn't have to be a good thing. So anytime when you're like, oh yeah, your brain can change, you can learn new things, you usually think about, well, what good stuff is coming to me? Can I learn all the languages? I'm going to learn to play instruments. I'm going to become a gymnast in my 50s. But also, it's worth bearing in mind that actually any time that positive change is possible, negative change is equally possible, and it happens with the same mechanism. So, you can learn to play the guitar. You can also learn to be more scared of social situations or learn to just accumulate negative habits and negative experiences in the same way as you can uh, improve your brain through the positive ones. That becomes really interesting when you look at brain injury specifically. So, like, the milder example I would give would be something like pain. If I reach my arm up over my head and it hurts because I get pain in my shoulder, then I do that every single day. Your brain is eventually going to rewire and change because of that. So number one, it might do certain things to your shoulder, like it might reduce the muscle mass and stuff there so that you're actually not physically able to move it as much. But then you might start to find that other things start to change as well. Like now you don't even lift your arm up to test your shoulder. You actually become afraid of moving your arm because of what might happen to your shoulder. And you might even notice like bigger behavioral shifts because of this as well. So maybe you actually find that you stop going to the same grocery store because you always need to lift stuff off the top shelf, and actually you find somewhere where you don't need to do that. And big things like your actual behavior can start to change and shift because of that. And that's all down to the brain rewiring these neural pathways to make you more likely to do certain things. And then when we get to more serious issues with the brain, there's something more interesting happens. So we'll talk a lot about language today just because it's an interesting one with neural pathways. But let's say that you've got a concussion or you've had a stroke or something that damages the parts of the brain that deal with language. If you've severely damaged a lot of neurons and nerves, those nerves aren't necessarily going to grow back. So some regrowth is possible in the brain. Quite a lot of it isn't. But then what's weird is that you actually find that people still recover the abilities that they lost. So that shouldn't be possible. If you damage the nerves that deal with speech in the brain, and then you regain the ability to speak, we used to think, well, that must be because the nerves got damaged and then they grew back. But actually, what we've come to know now is different parts of the brain actually start to take over the job of the damaged areas. And speech maybe is being a bit generous. It happens a bit less often there, but with any other region of the brain, damage happens. Other areas will step in to take over, and that is because of neuroplasticity. So you could say in that case, actually, the damage itself caused the brain to rewire itself to avoid that section of the brain. That's probably a bad thing. But then it actually has the ability to reshape and remold other parts of the brain to do what you want it to do. And that's a pretty good thing. So, yeah, there's positive and negative aspects of both, and it kind of works on this sliding scale. Um, and then in terms of the actual changes itself, there's two main factors. So one is duration, how long something happens, and the other one is intensity. I've put experience there. That's because I was in a rush when I was making these slides, but duration and intensity. So going back to language, duration, like if you do something over and over again every single day, even if it's not very intense, it's just like a small amount, we kind of all agree that that's the way you build a habit. Duolingo, the most popular language learning app in the world, sends you a threatening message every day when you don't log in and do something on the app because they know if you don't have to do very much language learning, but if you just check in every single day, eventually it's going to become a habit that you're going to just get your brain's going to get used to the idea that, yeah, I do Duolingo every single day. Whether or not it actually works the best for the language is another conversation, but it certainly gets the habit going and it certainly gets you on a roll, builds momentum in terms of actually achieving the end goal of, learning French or something. Intensity, on the other hand, is if you bombard your brain with as many different aspects as possible. So Duolingo wants you to do it every day, but it doesn't necessarily force you to engage in very much difficulty. It teaches you a few words, tests you on those same words, and then you're done. You don't have to do a whole lot of work. And if you just do that for long enough, then you'll see the changes happen in the brain. On the other hand, you could also just fly to France. So instead of learning just a couple of words every day, you're going to be bombarded with every French word ever in every different type of sentence and emotion, and with the slang, and some of it's on boards, some of it's coming from a radio or TV. And the intensity of that is going to cause the brain to start shifting and shaping things much more quickly. So both of those can influence how we actually learn. But now we're going to zoom in on the learning itself. So this slide, everything on this slide, if you find it interesting, I would recommend you look up the works of Dr. Barbara Oakley. She is, I believe, a neuroscientist, and I cannot remember the university, but she's very interesting. Wrote a book called Learning How to Learn, in which she talks about two modes of learning called the focused mode of learning and the diffuse mode of learning, and how they kind of interact with each other to help you be able to learn skills. And it sort of helps frame why sometimes we need to be really focused and intense in stuff, and sometimes we need to step back and have a rest. So, in the focus mode of learning, that's where the brain is trying to pay as much attention as possible to everything that it needs to know and ignore as much as possible everything that's not important. So, in the language learning aspect, your brain is going to be paying attention to stuff like the parts of the brain that are good at reading uh, verbal imagery. So like body language and lip reading and stuff like that. So there'll be parts, visual parts of your brain that deal with that. There will be the language centers of the brain that deal with like syntax and grammar and how you actually put stuff together to make a sentence. There'll be maybe the memory, certain parts of your memory that deal with, all the lists of words that you know and what context you might know them in. And then there'll be the parts of your brain that control the muscles of your throat itself. So like the muscles for your throat, your tongue, how you actually make the sounds that you need to make, and maybe even some about your hearing and how that relates. Your brain's going to really zoom in on all those areas. And its goal in the focus mode of learning is just figure out what stuff is important and what stuff we can just throw away. So when you hear somebody say a French word like bonjour, then it's going to hone in and be like, okay, that's what it sounds like. Does it always sound like that? Like which bit of this is super important? Does it always need to come from a person? Can it come from a radio? Can it come from different pitches? everything in the focus mode of learning is all about attention to detail and joining things together when it finds out what's not negotiable. So every time it says, all right, these three principles are always the same when somebody says that word, those neural connections are going to get strengthened really, really strong so that you can use it over and over again, and it becomes easier to recall, it becomes easier to say, it becomes easier to hear and understand. Um, and that's really useful because that's how you're going to be able to learn to speak the language. Or if it was any other skill, you're going to throw a ball, you're going to do a backflip. The same thing happens. The brain pays attention to everything that is necessary and tries to figure out everything that is unnecessary and strengthen all the connections of the necessary things. The problem with the focus mode is it uses up a hell of a lot of energy. So the amount of energy it takes to make those connections and the amount of space those connections are going to take up in your brain is kind of too much. So the next thing that needs to happen is the brain needs to like integrate all of the stuff it's just learned with everything else that goes on in the body. So that's when we enter into the diffuse mode. The diffuse mode is less about the thing that you've actually learned and more about how everything else that the brain already does, finding out where those things are similar. So, in the example of speech and learning French, you've got your throat makes certain movements for certain sounds. And a lot of those sounds are going to be the same in English as they are in French. So while you're learning French and you're kind of sounding out the words and like bonjour, je m'appelle James, um, your brain is forming those neural connections on their own. And that takes quite a lot of energy. And you'll probably find that you have to concentrate really hard to be able to say stuff when you're first learning it. But then after, if you can have enough rest time and you can sit with it for a little bit, then the brain goes, oh, cool. Well, actually, when you make that O sound, that's just the same as that other O sound that I make in English. When you do this hand gesture, that's just the same as this other hand gesture. Maybe when it's another skill, like, hey, you're gonna do a run and then a jump to do your somersault. Well, running we already know, so we can actually, instead of having for the somersault, running being its own little command over here, why don't we just link it to the running that we already know how to do? Or the same in French, like, oh, this word's just the same in English. Okay, well, let's not have a memory palace for two different words that are the same. So let's just make it the same one. And it's kind of quite cool because if you ever wonder, like, why do you have really weird dreams? That's essentially what's going on in your dreams in your sleep is your brain goes, okay, what happened today? Right, how can I just make all this more efficient by lumping it on top of other stuff that already happened to me in the past? So, that meeting that you had with your boss, suddenly there's ducks in the room because maybe you moved your arm in a certain way that was the same as when you were feeding ducks bread. And the brain's like, oh, cool. If I ever need to do that again, I'll just remember how I used to feed ducks bread and I'll just recreate that action. Sorry, that was a weird example, but dreams are pretty weird. But that's what's going on is your brain is finding all of the different movements, all of the different actions, all of the different thoughts, and just figuring out how to save energy and how to save like hard drive space in your brain by linking up things where it's possible. And that is where the real learning actually takes place is when you're defragmenting your brain like that, because then when you come back to it, you actually have more space to learn the new thing rather than having to use all your energy doing the previous thing that you learned. So where does walking come into this? Walking is one of the few activities that we do that's basically completely unconscious. So it takes about 300,000 to 500,000 repetitions of something being done in the same way before it becomes like an automated reflex in your body. So, when you blink, you probably blink the exact same way all the time. You probably don't even notice most of the time when you blink. Same goes for breathing, because you've done it so many times that your brain has figured out exactly what the kind of commands are for it in every possible circumstance. So, blinking in windy conditions versus blinking in really light areas versus dark areas. You've done it so many times that your brain already knows there's nothing that's ever going to surprise you when it comes to blinking. So blinking is just stored and ready as a reflex that you don't need to think about. And it probably was already stored anyway, but that's another story. Walking is very much the same. So you've already very likely gone way surpassed your 300,000 to 500,000 repetitions of walking in the first couple of years of your life. And that means that we can do it pretty much without thinking about it. So, try to walk down the street and have a chat on your phone or look around. You can do with no problem. Try to do the same thing on your bike, even if you've been cycling for years, and you find actually looking around is way more difficult. Like it's hard to keep the momentum going the same direction without, careering off course and crashing into somebody. Um, there's very few activities that most humans will ever achieve that autonomous status. Occasionally, very elite athletes might get uh, some actions to become so unconscious that they just don't need to think about it at all. Musicians might be another good example. Like if they've played the exact same thing over and over again, then you start to see that, they can sing on top of it without thinking about it. They can run around, dance around, and it doesn't seem like they're actually thinking about the music that they're playing. There's a good chance that that might have become autonomous as well. But pretty much the best activity that you can choose that is completely autonomous, completely reflexive, is walking. The brain, because of this, has developed loads of reflexes through the spine to make walking easier for you. So it's got a reflex that, when you swing your right arm forwards, it already knows your left leg is going to swing forwards. So every time you move your right arm, there's a reflex that says, hey, let's get ready to move the left leg, because more often than not, that's what's going to happen. There's also reflexes in your spine about how you rotate that you've developed even from being a baby. There's reflexes about what your head and your eyes do. There's loads of them that are just built into the system that just happen automatically without you needing to think about it in order to let you walk around and just do whatever you want, engage in whatever kind of activity that you want. And this is what makes it ideal for this diffuse mode of learning. Because hopefully I explained it well, but the idea is that you take the thing that you're doing, so even if it's got nothing to do with walking, it's speaking French, and your brain goes, okay, here's the movement your throat did. These two things link together. Okay, let's join those things together. Here's two other things. Here's the way that you heard that sound, and this is here's another instance where you heard that. Let's join those two things together. When you're walking, your brain is activating much more of these reflexes much faster, and you actually get more blood flow and more brain activity in the areas that are the most reflexive. It makes it a lot easier for your brain to basically find things that link together at any one point. So even if they don't have anything to do with walking, it's kind of like if you had, if you're trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle and you see all the empty pieces just laying around. So if you're sitting there on your own and you're just trying to stare at all the pieces, it's really hard to find, all right, is it this one? Is it this one? Is it this one? But if you had somebody who's like, hey, you're looking for straight edge pieces. Look, here's two. Any of these work? Okay. How about these? How about these? How about these? Over and over again, then it's going to be much easier to be like, oh yeah, that one looks like it could work. Nope. Well, okay, put it to the side. Okay, that one looks like it could work. Walking is basically the guy holding up the jigsaw puzzles. Every time a neural pathway fires, the brain goes, oh, that's different. Let's see if any of this stuff that I've just thought about links to any of the other stuff. And again, it doesn't have to be physical in your body. You know, your brain has loads of thoughts linked to how you move your arm and how you move your head and how you move your eyes. So loads of things will kind of bubble up every time you create a step, every time you create a movement. And the fact that you're walking through space and your eyes are seeing like different things that trigger different responses will change it as well. So one of the best things that we can do when we're actively trying to rest in order to improve our ability to learn a skill is to go for a walk. And that's basically the whole presentation, what it was leading up to. The final slide we're going to talk about and try and cover is what does that actually look like? So, what kind of walking should we engage in if we want to maximize our brain's ability to like defragment things and strengthen all these neural connections? So, three things you can do. Number one, you want to walk super casually. So walking's a interesting one, especially nowadays where we want everything to be really efficient. Um, you know, when I was younger, I remember my parents telling me, okay, we're going to go out for a walk. I'd be like, well, that's stupid. I'm not going to learn anything. I'm not going to achieve anything. We're going to leave the house. We're going to end up back at the house. I'm not going to get anywhere. Uh, felt really dumb. And now when we sort of think about walking for our mental health and stuff like that, usually the easiest way people can relate to it is like, well, if I know I'm walking from here to here, or if I know I'm walking a longer distance than I ever did before, or something like that, if it's got a goal attached to it, then it's like, ah, now it feels like it makes sense because I showed myself I can walk 10,000 steps, or I showed myself I can walk at a certain speed or to a certain place. But actually, when it comes to learning and this kind of recovery and integration, all of those things can go out the window. The best thing you can do is walk, first of all, slowly, like what's the most relaxed pace that you can go at. And the second thing that you can do is not give yourself an end direction. So, you know, walking down the street, and not even knowing whether you're going to turn left or right at the end, just get there and be like, yeah, you know what? I feel like going this way. I feel like going this way at the end of that street. And just taking yourself wherever you want to go without like too much purpose or thought into that aspect of things is going to get all of the reflexes firing better. It's also going to allow the brain to give you more like visual and auditory triggers. So when you see something on the road, I feel like going this way, good chance your brain's like, actually, I want you to go that way because I got some visual things that were useful for me. Second thing, avoiding using any kind of sensory distractions. So headphones are the big one. If you're listening to music, uh, is not terrible, but ideally, if you can be free of anything, again, that gives it too much direction or purpose, that's better. And then the other sensory things would be like carrying big, heavy backpacks or things under your arm or something like that. You want everything to be walking as freely as you possibly can in order to get the most benefit out of this like reflexive action or reflexive pathways that are going on. And then the final thing, the only thing that you do actually want to think about is if there's something in particular that you're trying to learn, then have it in your mind. So, you know, I'm trying to learn French. All right. I'm going to walk down the street thinking about French. I don't have to actually achieve anything with this. I just have to have it in my mind that that's potentially what I'm going to be thinking about. If you find your mind's wandering a lot, same as in meditation, kind of just go with it, like let it wander, and eventually, when you come back to your senses, oh yeah, I was thinking about French. You don't necessarily have to do that though. This kind of walking can also just be really good for defragmenting anyway. So, you know, if you find that your quality of sleep is really low, that's another place where we want to get working on memories and skill learning and stuff like that. This kind of walking might actually be really good for you because it does some of the processing first, and then when you get to the end of the day, actually your brain's got less urgency about having to sort out all of this stuff, and it might actually help you sleep better just because of, walking and activity is better for sleep. But also then if you don't sleep as well, you actually still get more of the kind of processing power of from the walk and the kind of diffuse integration anyway. Uh, so yeah, that's all we've got. Thank you very much for giving me your time. If you're interested in kind of looking at things further, you feel free to email me. I've got all of my kind of contacts and things that you can look at there. So email, Instagram, websites, and then over on the right-hand side here, we've got the YouTube channel. Um, yeah, anything that you want to know, you can book in for consultations or paid sessions. We've got products on the website around vision and balance and things that train your reflexes really nicely. So please do feel free to check those out. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and I'll have a quick check if there's any questions. Otherwise, I will leave you here.